So hey everybody, welcome to Lisbon. I'm Kreutler. I've worked at GNOSIS for the last 4 years, and right now I'm co-lead of the GNOSIS Guild team that builds the Zodiac tools for DAOs. And my talk today is on a prehistory of DAOs, cooperatives, gaming guilds, and the networks to come. You can find me on Twitter at Kreutler and our team at GNOSIS Guild. So when I present DAOs to audiences that aren't familiar with them, I usually present it as a chimeric term, something that comes from imagining how features of decentralized technology, like global digital assets, censorship resistance, and automated actions will change how organizations operate. And the term DAO first appeared in the Ethereum community in 2014. However, there were earlier terms that we know less of now, but decentralized autonomous corporation and decentralized autonomous company, or DAC, that pre-existed in the Bitcoin space prior. And of course, the DAO experiment proved short-lived, but since then, many DAOs have come in its wake, which is something of an emotional timeline for many of us. And in addition to more platforms and protocols related to DAOs coming to the fore, I think also more imaginal qualities, or qualities projected onto what DAOs would be, came to us. So autopoietic, they're self-making, they're aligned, they're co-owned, and they're also mnemonic, or they aspire to be mnemonic, in the sense that they're institutions in which their institutional memory is automatically recorded through their operations and becomes public knowledge. However, I'd say that while the term DAO is new, the ideas behind it are not, particularly in the discourse around networks. A favorite term of think tanks in the 20th century, and particularly seen in the 1995 RAND report, Tribes, Institutions, Markets, Networks, by David Runfelt. And this report says that there are broadly 4 types of organizational forms through which humanity has progressed. However, key to the framework is not that one organizational form replaces the one that's prior to it, but rather that they curtail and supplement them as they grow. And of particular interest to DAOs is how the report represents networks. So, key distinguishing feature from organizational forms preceding it, networks are described as multi-organizational, and they facilitate the growth of distributed web-like global enterprises and increasingly so-called virtual corporations. Sounds familiar? And neither public nor private, the primary domain of networks in the report is a third autonomous social sector, which the report identifies as civil society. And I'd like to bring up this report in the context of DAOs because I think knowingly or not, we've inherited a lot of the discourse around networks from the 90s and how we talk about them. And given it was published by the RAND Corporation, which is a nonprofit think tank that went on to advise the US military and government, it's important that we realize the lineage of DAOs relates to a certain type of Western liberalism, as well as a kind of soft power that would be exported in the decades following it. And it's easier to change lineages that you are aware of, which is why I referenced the report. In that light, with the emphasis on civil society's 3-letter acronyms for organizations, NGOs, NPOs, and PVOs, a future one is naturally missing, DAOs. So DAOs today. I would offer a working definition for DAO as a voluntary association with the operating principles of digital cooperativism. And what I mean by operating principles is not that DAOs have an organizational or legal structure that's one-to-one synonymous with cooperatives, more that they embrace cooperativism as a kind of protocol, a kind of set of economic relations between members that emphasize co-ownership. And as voluntary associations, they are a cross-jurisdictional way for strangers, friends, or unlikely allies to pseudonymously come together towards shared goals, often supported by a token model, incentives, and governance held in common. And it's important to remember that DAOs are not just technical protocols for governance or reducible to the software that they use, but rather that they're communities that coordinate through collective vibes. And the DAO landscape has really bloomed beyond the initial protocol DAOs to service DAOs, social DAOs, media DAOs, and even collector DAOs. And many make the joke that while DAOs are not reducible to their software, today they're basically a group chat and a bank account, which looks like a Discord forum and often a GNOSIS safe multi-sig. And here is a screenshot of the popular Uniswap grants program multisig, which has 4 out of 6 owners who were elected to the multisig to transfer grant proposals. And additionally, here's a screenshot of Pleaser DAO's multisig, which is a popular collector DAO that collects NFTs of artists they admire. They've also issued an internal governance token as well as an external fractionalization token so that members of the DAO can vote on which net artworks they'll acquire. And what I think from an institutional perspective that's the most interesting about things like Pleaser DAO is that they often invite the artists they collect to become members of the DAO in turn, which greatly challenges the traditional divides between artists, gallerists, and collectors. And I would like to see more institutional experimentation along these lines be brought by DAOs in basically every industry. And along these lines, because most DAOs represent governance rights through a token, in some sense you could say tokens Trojan horse principles of cooperatives directly into highly financialized spaces. And while I think tokenization is far from the answer to the social media woes of Web 2, I do believe for DAOs with a mission of economic value creation, be it curation, collection, or software development, a token becomes a useful mechanism on 3 fronts: bootstrapping funding, granularly and widely distributing governance rights, and aligning an ecosystem of DAOs, not only one organization. And the space is new, which means that many norms around tokens have not yet been established. I would offer one that as a guiding star, Web3 applications could aim to introduce value in relations which have been historically denied it, such as labor and environment, rather than creating new financialized relations between its members. And in this light, DAOs could also learn a lot from cooperatives, which can be defined as member-owned enterprises that are managed by their members as well. And we can look to the 1844 Rosteal principles for cooperatives that give a highlight and are actually still used by many cooperatives today and embraced by the International Cooperative Alliance. And if we look at them, voluntary and open membership, democratic member control, autonomy and independence, and perhaps most interestingly, cooperation among cooperatives, we see a list that easily could have been drafted by many DAOs today, though not all. And we could see something like cooperation among DAOs as one of their chief concerns. And perhaps where cooperativism most strongly intersects with the DAO space is through the work of Nathan Schneider and others, particularly his 2019 essay, Startups Need a New Option, Exit to Community, where he highlights a third way for startups to evolve their ownership. Rather than doing an IPO or corporate acquisition, they could share the value of what they produce with those who value it most. So that's the users and members of the platforms they've created. And also in a great paper by Morshed Manan called Fostering Worker Cooperatives with Blockchain Technology, he highlights 3 dilemmas that cooperatives currently face. So fundraising, international governance, and alignment. Bootstrapping initial funding, international governance in the sense of scaling across jurisdictions, as well as bureaucratic and cultural coherence as cooperatives grow. And as seen before, these are DAO patterns that could be, while not a panacea for cooperatives, greatly helpful in their scaling and becoming a global movement again. Because they help with bootstrapping funding, granularly and widely distributing governance rights, and aligning not only one organization, but potentially a network of cooperatives, similar to the Mondragon cooperation we see today. And DAOs can learn a lot from cooperatives in their long-termism, both around economic assets, as well as the well-being of their members, and the environment that surrounds them. DAOs can also learn a lot from gaming guilds. So in massively multiplayer online games, players are mostly free to set their own goals, loosely guided by the game world narrative. And referred to broadly as guilds, clans, or alliances, these groups average in size between 40 to 150 participants, but sometimes up to 1,000, and their goals could include defeating difficult enemies or constructing useful tools. Basically any goal that's out of the scope of a single player acting alone. And these could include things like mega projects like building a Titan-class warship in EVE Online. And what gaming guilds have really noticed is that it's important for the same players to work together again, because they've established cooperative patterns, as well as the fact that most players have complementary skill sets, so different in-game characters that mean that they complementary work together well. And key to gaming guilds and the same players working together again is the distribution of loot and its perceived fairness. So loot are in-game items that are often dropped at the end of a successful battle or mission. And Loot is a quite loaded term in the crypto space today that I think we've learned can spawn its own type of worlds. And to deal with the perceived fairness of loot distribution in games, many systems have developed. One is Drag and Kill Points. Originally developed in 1999 as part of the EverQuest MMO, DKP act as a private money system separate from any existing currency in the game world, and they're distributed to guild members based on their participation in raids. And guild members can then use these points or this private money to spend for the loot items they most would like. And it's out of the scope of the talk today, but there's a great work called Drag and Kill Points, a summary white paper, that talks about a specific instance of Drag and Kill Points on a World of Warcraft server that's in practice today and highly relevant to crypto. And so these guild patterns of, say, DKP, Drag and Kill Points, autonomous dispute resolution, so being able to solve in-game disputes in-game, or at least online, as well as the market allocation of publicly owned goods that you see in many DKP systems, could be massively helpful for what I see as DAO dilemmas today. So I think there's a huge crisis about how to track meaningfully contribution, participation, and reputation in DAOs, especially as they go across Discord forums. And in this light, it's also difficult to then distribute resources on these faulty records of reputation. And also DAOs could learn from the type of small team trust and coherence that gaming guilds build. Another insight from gaming guilds is that, as researcher Joshua Citarella points out, many DKP systems resemble a form of market socialism, in which goods are publicly owned but allocated by markets. And I would think that shadow economics could be an apt term for when a group operates through an economic form it might never label itself as, whether DAOs as digital cooperatives or gaming guilds as market socialism. And I think herein lies the crux and the opportunity that we have as a community, because I think in DAO's ambiguity and its ahistoricity, so in some sense it's kind of ignorance of its lineage, there is opportunity for collaboration across existing ideological divides and polarization. We have the freedom to experiment with different economic forms without worrying about their labels. And so for the DAOs to come, what will they look like based on this? It's my opinion that DAOs will not be the uniformly non-hierarchical networks some imagine. Instead, they will coordinate across different levels of coherence and trust, despite some pockets of flat hierarchy. And from this, you could sketch about 3 layers of a DAO. You could say there's a token, that there are teams, guilds, and squads that are then represented by that token ownership, and that there are missions, milestones, and raids financed by token ownership and often chained together to do more large-scale public works. And from these layers itself, a hierarchical network emerges. Hierarchical here meaning an organization that possesses the ability to be ranked in multiple ways. So looking at an ecosystem of DAOs, from one perspective, DAO B, we could see the DAO B token and the teams distributed in one way, but from the perspective of another DAO, we could see similar teams and similar goals, but still a differently ranked organization. And in this light, one of the promises of DAOs that I think is still far from achieved, but on the table, is that because programmable assets or tokens can be distributed in a more granular way than traditional corporate interest memberships or shares, the possibility for an entirely new type of token holder company formation comes to the fore, which can incorporate greater practical knowledge and governance without increasing transaction costs, or in other words, without decreasing organizational efficiency as DAOs grow. And key to the promise here is the idea of tacit knowledge being embedded in governance. Tacit knowledge meaning informal, practical knowledge that can be surfaced to make better decisions on the whole. And I think one of the best examples of blockchain governance that's trying to incorporate tacit knowledge is the Regen Network, a public blockchain for ecosystem services that has set aside 30% of their tokens for climate scientists, land stewards, and indigenous peoples to both manage the value generated by the network as well as decide on protocoled governance decisions. And so far, we've seen tokens primarily build worlds around speculation and exit. However, as fundamentally new types of tokens emerge, they will build worlds around entrance too, and for better or worse, attached to how physical resources are governed. And looking beyond token voting governance, which has become a recent topic in the space, I would say that while tokens can distribute governance rights, we should also move beyond token voting as the first solution to decision making. So from Vitalik's recent piece, instead we can look to proof of personhood, participation, and retroactive public goods funding to deal with plutocratic issues. However, I think what's missing in the critiques of token voting is the insight that tokens are, in some sense, a new form of digital object that will take time to establish norms around. Or in other words, we don't yet know what tokens can do, and they don't look like traditional governance rights, shares, or currencies. And this is why, as a team, we're building Zodiac, the expansion pack for DAOs. It's a composable design philosophy for DAOs and a collection of tools built according to an open standard. Because DAOs are not monoliths, they're constellations. And Zodiac launched with a collection of tools including exit, delay, and bridge, as well as reality, which some of you might know as SafeSnap. And they can all be equipped through the Zodiac app on the GNOSIS Safe, and you can plug and play different features. So things like the exit module bring Moloch DAO's rage quit function to the safe. The reality module can take off-chain votes on-chain and execute them by the safe in a decentralized community way. There's also custom modules, bridge modules across any EVM chain, and more. And in one sense, Zodiac mods are designed to take decision-making beyond token voting, looking to hybrid models using time delays and anti-collusion signaling methods. And at their core, they decouple avatars or accounts from decision-making, meaning that practices surrounding governance, membership, and treasury management can be customized independently of the affordances of a tool a DAO uses. And in short, this means that DAOs can now be living, breathing, evolving organizations. With a programmable account like the GNOSIS Safe at their core, and tools built on the Zodiac open standard support, unlike other DAO platforms today, organizations that can evolve over time and incorporate multiple teams and different types of tacit knowledge in a changing governance structure. So in summary, we have gaming guilds, we have cooperatives using software, and we have group chats. And many of us in the DAO space are like, oh my God, is this an entirely new organizational form in the history of humanity? And while I think it's definitely not today, it has the opportunity to be. So I think with the networks to come, their digital primacy, meaning the fact that they primarily deal in digital assets, as well as usually start as internet native organizations, allows some not to take seriously the fact that cooperative principles, gaming guilds, and other auto-imaginaries like DAOs present an emergent organizational form with legitimate political relevance. And I think why it is important to grant DAOs legitimacy as political forms today is because those on the other side of the digital divide will be at a further disadvantage when stakeholdership has not been actively cultivated among them, and this becomes, potentially protocol governance becomes, one of the main forms of political participation in the next century, which is a partial chance. So to end on a more speculative note, I'll read part of a paragraph from my essay of the same name as this talk that presents a kind of speculative way in which DAOs can participate in the political sphere more explicitly. So to call attention to the term's failings at seriousness, many return to its misnomer. The A in DAO does not live up to its autonomous reference. And while others like researcher Adelané invoke the political rather than the technical spirit of autonomy in DAOs, even though the term DAO remains poetically correct, in my opinion, we could propose an occasional replacement, decentralized avatar organizations, which would take their political stakes both lightly and heavily. And as poetician and digital minister of Taiwan Audrey Tang notes, the days of avatar politicians are already here. They are virtual beings that represent, rally, and advocate on behalf of political platforms. A decentralized avatar organization would recognize the coming virtual zeitgeist. This could look like a collectively managed cyborg like Lil Michaela, or an entire environment shaped by its members, like trust moving castles. And decentralized avatar organizations will have collectively developed interoperable game worlds, engines, or virtual being mascots at their core, which co-creates the culture around which their members organize. And as is the case with MMOs, or massively multiplayer online games, DAOs are less technical protocols for governance and more high-stakes game worlds that interweave. Because we might see something like DAO versus PAC, Political Action Committee, as soon as 2024, or as soon as tomorrow. And for this reason, rather than just code, we should aim for rough consensus and running worlds. So thank you so much. If you're interested in continuing the conversation, I recommend that you would join our team, the GNOSIS Guild Discord, follow us on Twitter, or check out our blog for a longer, more nuanced take on this presentation. And I would love to talk with you all soon. Thank you.